Good afternoon, everyone. 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, and you're on your break, so it's okay with me. I think actually coming to talk at this conference actually has enlightened me on one thing. I've just recently finished a talk in the seminar room which was all about big data and the aggregation of data and the data which is actually out there and available to us as marketeers, as professionals, etc. I then saw there's another seminar taking place which is all around innovation. We sit between the two. So the business being Black Swan Innovation, our proposition as such is how do we actually start to utilise data and build products, services, etc., which ultimately launch into market. So we recently just won the Sunday Times fastest growing startup accolade for 2015. We've gone from 2 to 260 in the space of 2.5 years. So we're doing something right, whether it's by chance or on purpose. But I think a forum like this naturally lends itself for people to talk about successful innovations which have disrupted a market, which have broke through. I'm going to slightly flip it on its head, and I'm going to talk about why innovations, and such a large proportion of innovations within the FMCG sector fail. We're talking roughly between 90 and 95% of innovations which are launched within the first 18 months of hitting shelf fail. That's not acceptable. It's not acceptable from my perspective as an innovation, as someone that's worked in innovation now for over a decade. And this was a stat which came to me about 3 years ago, which said to me one thing, is things need to change. And Philip from Intel, I'm not sure how many of you were in that talk earlier just before lunch, spoke about if you're creating things and they're not smart, you need to start creating smart things. It was a bit more detailed than that. But we're approaching it from the same perspective as well, that if you need to still ask the question in research, you need to change. And as a business, that's what we're doing. And I'm going to talk now a bit about how we can actually start to leverage data and apply it to an innovation through an innovation lens. So some of our clients here, so Pepsi, Samsung, Unilever, Vodafone, Mondelez, have been clients since day one, so the last sort of 2.5, 3 years. Retained with a number of these, offering developing innovation programs for incremental, but also starting to lean now into breakthrough innovation ideas. So the next 10 minutes I'll talk you through some live case studies as such around some of these clients. So what is big data? Any of you that have been in the seminar room which I just came out of, they'll give you a lot more detailed explanation as to what big data is. I think what I've got in these slides is scratching the surface from what I've learned today. But I think the first thing to sort of talk about is this misconception across the marketing industry that big data equals social data. So social data like Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram. Yes, it is a vital component of the big data sort of anomaly or definition as such, but it's not the only component. A lot of the brands we work with are chasing that millennial audience, as I'm sure marketeers in here are having those discussions now and have for the last few years. 80% roughly of content produced on social channels is by this millennial audience, so its relevance is important. But actually, when you start to enrich these sort of what is the publicly available social data with other data sources, such as news, blogs, forum, you start to get a lot more of a detailed understanding as to what these people are naturally talking about. Baskets, so dunnhumby, I'm sure you're familiar with dunnhumby, created the Tesco Club Card 20 years ago, way before we even thought about the application of big data within marketing services. Recently had a valuation of over £1 billion. That's what it costs to understand what goes into someone's shopping basket on a regular basis. Weather data, so for programmatic ad buying, how do you get to a position where you can start to predict weather patterns within certain countries and areas around the world. And then this point here, sort of in the bottom right, around disparate internal data. There's so much data readily available to us, being produced as I speak right now. Actually, one of the most enjoyable sort of challenges which I've been presented with in recent months is working with one of those large 5 organisations to make sense of some of the really quite basic data they have within their 4 walls. So that's everything from, I say everything, it was 3 components, so sales data, distribution and media spend. So how can we actually start to deconstruct the data which they hold on across those three pillars around product launches to understand or start to build a DNA of a successful product launch. This is data which sits within the 4 walls and has done for a number of years, and some of the learnings from that were quite astounding. I think when I came into research 12 years or so ago, I was told that there's a job that exists out there where I get to listen and then I get to reinterpret what I hear and I'll get paid to do so. I didn't believe it, so I pursued a job in research. And then, much to sort of my dismay as such, was the first thing I was trained on was not to listen, but how to ask the right question. Of course, it's important. It's important in the context of facilitating and moderating focus groups, constructing 10-page long surveys, which take consumers 25 minutes to complete. The challenge I always had is if you have to ask, if you're asking the question, you probably have an idea or can allude to what the response is going to be. But by asking a question, how do you give yourself the opportunity to find the unknown unknowns? So you can only ask a question about something you already know about. How do you find sort of the interesting things within a category or product or brand which you never would have dreamt of? I then went through a process of being trained to run ethnographies, to go on lengthy immersions, which was a lot of fun, especially working with some of the brands in the alcohol industry, so spending long weekends with groups of 25, 30-year-old males, understanding the product and where it sits in the context of their wider life. Again, though, as you said, concern around breaking context there. It is currently, and has been for the last few years, around co-creation, community. Nielsen spoke earlier about the importance of optimizing a product before it goes into market through co-creation and facilitating a conversation with specific consumers. But actually now, it's gone full circle. The reason I got into this industry was because, much to the belief, as I'm standing here talking for 20 minutes, I quite like to listen. And our proposition as Black Swan Innovation is all around how we can actually apply data science to listen and then launch products off the back of it. So what is the beauty of listening? You don't need to ask the question. I spoke about that a few moments ago. You don't need to ask, I won't go tread over old ground. You don't need to break context. So when you think of, so I'm sure many of you have sat within focus groups facilitating or sat the other side of the glass wall and you've asked someone to recall the last time they consumed a Pepsi, and half of them in there put their hand up and say it was 6 months ago. Question one, how the hell did you get through the screener? But question two is, okay, now I need you to recall what you did when you last had that Pepsi, how it made you feel, who you were with, what you did after it. All of this, I'm asking someone to recall what is inconsequential information from 6 months ago. And they'll either do one of two things. They'll have a very good stab at it, or they will say they can't remember. And the amount of business decisions from an innovation perspective which are made off of those conversations when you're asking people to recall the last time they consumed a product still scares me even to this day. So then the sort of the final point around the beauty of listening is your understanding the relationship someone has with your product or brand or category, the moment of consumption. There's no what people say and what people do are two very, very different things. People will claim to eat their 5 a day, to never give their kids sugary drinks, to a whole multiple things. The reality of it is, the businesses I work with and work for, if that was all true, they wouldn't be in existence and the multi-billion-pound businesses they are. So just how big is big data? Big data can be as small or as big as your platform allows it to be. But just to give you an idea, not to scare, but to inspire you, as it did me when I saw these figures 2.5 years ago, the volume of content which has been produced. This is a minute-by-minute basis. I've been talking now for nearly 10 minutes, so we can multiply that by 10. So I think almost 4 million search queries on Google, almost 2.5 million pieces of content produced and shared on Facebook, 277,000 unique pieces of content produced and distributed across Twitter. 204 million emails have been sent. I'm sure most of those have been received probably in and around this conference. 35,000 photos sent on WhatsApp. 23,300 hours of connectivity over Skype. Again, so just to reiterate, these figures here are to inspire, they're not to scare. There is so much data and so much content which is being organically produced by our audience on a minute-by-minute basis that we'd be foolish not to stand up or to sit up, open our ears and listen. And just give you an idea of the application of some of this for some of our clients. So 4 million search queries on Google. Sorry for the video, that was my creative team. 4 million search queries on Google. So what does that actually mean? So 2 years ago, a proof of concept project we did for GSK. How can we start to predict the breakout of a cold across the United States and Canada? So what are those key symptoms people search for when they feel like a cold is coming on? So based on the information we can gather through a Google API around the key symptoms people are starting to research, leads us to believe that the epidemic is a cold. Is starting to break out in this state following this path. What that means for GSK is their media spend can be more focused and they can save a lot of money from distribution by getting the right products on shelf at the right place at the right time. For Pinterest, for 3,500 images on Pinterest, baked goods is one of the categories I work on with Mondelez. What does that mean for Mondelez? The eruption of sort of the Great British Bake Off and all of these, the Primrose Hill bakeries and all of these fantastic things which have emerged over the last few years around the explosion of baking at home. There's people now producing products which I can almost, at home today, which I can almost guarantee will be the next evolution of products which will hit our shelf under the guise of a Cadbury's or a Mondelez or a Mars. How can we actually start to leverage what people are producing and start to quantify the opportunity for that product they've produced at home, shared on Pinterest, and we've seen it be shared, liked, retweeted. So what behaviour is connected post-consumption of that image that alludes to a figure that we can start to quantify potential success? Gathering data is still a challenge, but it's becoming yesterday's news. How do you actually start to apply data so that it's relevant to the real world? And I think a chap from the host of Ireland I listened to speak earlier spoke about how companies like Facebook, Alibaba, Uber, etc. are now obsessing over the end user experience because the aggregation of the data is now secondary news. It's all about how you apply it to the real world. And that's very much from a marketing services perspective where we come in as an organisation. So we've developed a few processes, and anyone that's sort of even taken 12 manuscripts from 12 different focus groups across 6 different countries will understand the feeling of paralysis by analysis. Imagine that times 200 million conversations captured in various different formats for you now to analyse. So how do we produce something from 200 million conversations which makes sense for Unilever and their refreshment category? So we approach it in a number of ways, but 4 key areas I'll bring out. So an inside-out and outside-in analysis. So the inside-out analysis is what are those things which are core to our brand and how are they performing across these social conversations? So an example which I'll show you shortly is the 5 trends as a business which we operate around from an innovation perspective, from a communications perspective, we use to brief in all of our agencies, and it's very much sort of champions all of our internal thinking. And then the outside-in analysis. So if you have 200 million conversations globally around tea, what the hell are people talking about? Are they talking about the time and the occasion when they're drinking it, who they're drinking it, the origin of the product, the blend that they're consuming and why? So we start to naturally cluster those conversations just to give you an idea as to what people are actually talking about. We then find the individuals who are driving those conversations, the influencers. So we're not after aggressive friend collectors here who have managed to hit 10,000 friends on Facebook but are actually not producing anything of value. We're after people who are actually starting to shift the sentiment of conversation across a certain category of brand or product. We then, from an innovation perspective, I spoke about that, the Pinterest, how we utilise Pinterest. Within 3 days, get to 100 ideas for one of our clients. A process which traditionally would take 2 to 3 months and cost over £100,000, we can get to for 15 for a reasonable sum of money, and we can actually start to quantify that opportunity space. And the key there is demand-driven innovation. It's what people are talking about without us having to ask the question of what they want next. And then finally, a lot of the ingredient and benefit tracking. So the whole beverage category has become obsessed with the benefits connected to every single ingredient which sits within that product now. So how can we actually start to track which benefits are important? So is actually, of course, January is all about detox. February might be about X, March might be about Y. So we can actually start to make incremental tweaks to our communication or agency's communications so we're talking about the right benefit at the right time connected to some of our ingredients. So here's an example of one of the clients I'm working with at the moment. So sort of unbranded this as such, but these lines represent 5 different trends within their business, which are there to inspire everything, innovation, comms, etc. And if I was to tell you that 80% of their spend was on the free volume over time lines here, which is either inclining or declining, that would shock you, right? So what we do is we take trends within a business and we actually work out how we can measure the volume of conversation across a 2, 3, 4, 5-year data set, but also the sentiment of that conversation and how it's shifted, because what we learned from the past allows us to start predicting what we think will happen in the future. We prioritise our clients' innovation focus around trends which are actually inclining. So, for example, the health and wellness trend or the experience trend within some of the sectors we're looking at. And this graph alone, we took to sort of the C-suite of one of these clients, and the impact was quite significant. The impact was quite significant. I spoke earlier about sort of some of these naturally surfacing conversations and clusters of conversations. What does that actually mean? So if we think about the beverage or FMCG, some of the FMCG data sets we've been looking at, there's a couple of examples of how we've seen conversations shift over time and what we think that will mean in 6, 12, 18 months for some of our clients who are putting products on shelf. So the calorie conversation, nothing new. It's been around for a long time. It started with how do I avoid high-calorie products. It then went into, okay, it's now about mid-cal. So Coke Life launched off the back of this mid-calorie trend successfully. It then came about zero-calorie or no-calorie. Actually, what consumers are talking about now, and talking about in quite significant volume, is the key ingredients which actually start to expedite the process of burning calories for you, whatever those ingredients may be. So imagine in 12, 18 months post going through the whole regulatory process with some of our clients, where we can actually start producing products which we put on shelf which talk about the minus calorie and minus X calorie as opposed to 0 calorie. They're healthy but indulgent. Healthy and indulgent have sat on 2 ends of the scale. They've been enjoyed in exclusivity. Healthy might not always be enjoyed, but it's consumed in volume. Why do they need to sit in exclusivity? It's almost like British politics now. It's this race for the middle. It's how can I deliver a product to the market which is both healthy but also indulgent. A perfect example of that is the eruption of the popcorn category over the last couple of years, and it's grown by 130% and hugely starting to, pardon the pun, eat into the crisp market. And I spoke a bit about this whole benefit-led proposition. So beverages now, what benefits can I leverage and talk about in communications which are actually sitting within the champion products of the champion ingredients of my products? Identifying influencers, again, it's not about aggressive brand collectors. How do we use influencers? They're influencing a category. They have blogs, forums, etc. already, which have large followings. What they're producing, people are listening to, and then acting on the back of it. How can we use them from a marketing perspective and credit them for what comes out of this process to actually help us start to look a bit further ahead of our category than as traditionally as researchers we do when we dip in and out of a project for a month or so at a time. So we measure our algorithms, measure these individuals on everything from reach through to activities, so how the content's being consumed and behaviour connected post-consumption, but also the engagement. Anyone can go onto Twitter now and create a spike in conversation. How do you sustain that conversation over an extended period of time is what we're looking for when we find people to work with. The rapid innovations, I spoke earlier about the good side project we're working on, but quickly get into 50, 100, 200 ideas, which have all come from this demand-driven space, stuff which is being talked about, which is being shared, which is being reshared, and actually then start to quantify the potential opportunity space which lies within it. So in the top right-hand corner, the basic lozenge which says the volume of conversation around concept A over the last 30 days is X. And based on the machine learning, we can then start to predict the impact we think that will have on an industry moving forward. This is revolutionising innovation. This is making the process quicker. It's taking, to an extent, subjectivity out of the process, and it's allowing us to launch stuff which, I mean, time will be the perfect test of this, but which is going to hugely reduce that 90 to 95% in favour of an innovation space. Yes, it's incremental innovation. Will we disrupt the industry, create breakthrough? Probably not, but incremental is enough for brands. So I think I've nearly probably out of time, but so I think there's one thing which I've said a lot, but probably very little, which I'd suggest that I leave you with today. It's this idea that failure comes from having to ask the question. There's so much data now which is being organically produced by our audience about our brands, products, categories in the exact moment they're consuming it. We'd be foolish not to listen. So, as researchers, let's stop asking the question and let's go back to what our job should have been, and that's listening.